All right, traders. Good afternoon. This is Christian from Strategic Trade Group, and it is just about 5 o'clock on Monday. A lot of things to go over today, so we'll try to go through them quickly. But please read the risk disclaimer here. Everything that we're talking about is for information purposes only. So, theme of the day: follow through from Friday's bounce. Clearly, we are in a downtrend, right? There's been a lot of bear market activity, whether or not you want to call it bear market, whatever. The activity that we've seen, the market has been down for 7 weeks in a row coming into this week. That is a bear market. So let's talk about a couple things that I thought were really interesting before we get into the numbers for the day. Number one, and then we'll come back to these after I go through the numbers. But just really interesting. Zoom Video, which is not a favorite company of mine by any means, but what I'm doing in this market is kind of just observing. Observing what the expectations are for some of these earnings reports that are coming out. Clearly we saw a disaster in retail last week, right? But now, and some of those names in retail just hadn't been through a big move down yet. Some of them were still kind of holding in there, right? Some areas of the market have been doing that. Some of these companies, like a Zoom Video, has already gone down, a decent clip, right? The high of the stock was 588. It's now at 89. Is the damage done at this point, right? For names like this. And if you go through and you kind of look to see where the PE ratio is in some of these names, how they're valued. Oops, where do I have this? Let's see. Oh, I don't know where I have it. Maybe I don't have it up. Zoom Video, right? So the PE, it's still kind of high on average. It's a 30. The estimated PE is a 25, but at least it's not a 50 or 100. Probably where a lot of these companies were before. So they came out today and they upped their guidance, probably a very low bar to jump over, but it's just kind of interesting, right? Now, do I want to own this company? No, I don't think I do. But I think at the very least, it's kind of telling you some things here in the fact that the stock actually bounced pretty decently here. The implied move for this stock for the options, we're expecting about a 20% move, but I would have thought, hey, that this stock goes in the direction of the prevailing trend, which is down, right? But remember, things do change, especially when you take a look at what is priced into this market already, right? And earnings can really kind of change a trend around too, as well. So just kind of interesting. The other thing that I find interesting is that there's a acquisition that happened over this weekend too, where you're looking at Broadcom, which is acquiring a company as well, right? So that kind of VMware, and if you look at VMware and where this got to, right, people are starting to kind of look at these names and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe some of these names, which a lot of them have all gone down, together as a group, some could be a decent value down here. So interesting that this version point of control was taken out, right? So it did get to the point of 92.70. But the point is, right, after 7 weeks of a down move in the market, right, I want to be kind of and what I try to kind of illustrate what I'm doing is really take note of if things are changing or not, or if the trend is still, if we're still going to continue to kind of move down and maybe notch an 8th week, for a down week of the market, right? Do things look different? Right. One of the things that we have been talking about over the last, couple months is that the sellers have been in control. When you look at 5-minute bars, a lot of times, not every day of the week that we saw in the last couple months, but many days of each week where we just looked at the 5-minute bar and said, okay, first minute of the 5-minute bar goes up is green. And then by the time the 5 minutes are over and the bar closes, it's red, right? Sellers are in control in that situation. So at some point, I think that could flip, right? And that's where, we want to observe, right? And I think if you look to see, for today, for example, it looks a little bit different. right, I wanted to highlight a couple. So now let's talk about, some of the price action for the day. So we did have that follow through from Friday's, end of the day bounce. But, there's a lot of work that has to get done here, right? First of all, this 20-day moving average has been, a kiss of death. Every time that we've come into this 20-day moving average, it's been a disaster, right? And that may be a place, if you're actively shorting in this market, that may be a place where you want to see the market gravitate back up to think about whether or not you want to be shorting in here. What I find is pretty interesting. Always, I find some kind of clues, hints on the smaller time frames, not just the longer time frame. Mostly, you could find both of that on the longer time frame, but as well on the shorter time frame is the point that I'm trying to make, right? So if you look at the 1 hour chart, a couple things that you may find here is that when you look at basically every other week, right, here's a rally, right? The rally ran right into a virgin point of control. The next week, we moved heavily down. The following week, we moved up quite a bit, right, and stalled, right? And again, you could look at this 200 period moving average to say, how many times have we crossed this thing and failed, right? So that's 1, 2, right? Then the following week, once again, a movement down, right? Followed by a movement up, only retracing, a portion of that move and then failing once it pokes its head above the 200 period moving average. So a couple of things that are a little bit different about this week, right? Number one, and the week is not over. This is the beginning of the week, but if the pattern were to happen again, this should be another decent down week, right? After this, right? So first of all, it's just Monday, but we don't have that yet. Number two, look at the size of the value area for this week, right? So again, the value areas are based on the volume at price. So because this is a wider value area, it's because the price kind of traveled in a different path last week. It was a pretty decent range last week. And part of that was because of option expiration, the high from the low of where we were on the low on Friday. But it looks like it's a little bit different shape than some of these value areas have been kind of thin, right? So this is actually the widest one. So I don't know. It's I'm open to seeing what happens next. And that could be that we have a little bit more of a bear market rally, right? And we do have to see where we get to in terms of once we hit this resistance at 40.11. So I think that's the next thing to watch. And then if we do break above 40.11, then we can kind of concentrate at this VPOC up here, which again is a decent ways away. So, I wouldn't be exactly aiming for that to say, oh, this is definitely going to happen next. I think you have to take it slow. And I think that you have to watch things like we do every day, market breadth, to see if the market is strong, and so on and so forth. So that's the S&P. That's the first thing that I wanted to go over with you guys in terms of the charts, up about 1.9% for the day. The diamonds actually outperformed. The small caps, which I think are also very interesting, right? When we look at the small caps, right, they're very close to breaking out of this week's value area. So I would watch 179.22 for that. The pattern here is different, right? This did not come in and break the lows of last week. It didn't even come close. Well, I don't want to say it didn't come close. I'm being a little bit too optimistic there. The low of Friday kind of came into the middle of this, or part of this candle. But at the very least, right, it's looking better than, like, let's say what the Qs look like right now, right? It's showing a tiny bit of relative strength. All right. Next, let's talk a little bit about, the price action for the day, what kind of market that we saw for the day. And it's actually the energy stocks. And I'm actually surprised at this. I saw a couple divergences in the energy stocks kind of through last week. They've made new highs, but the RSI, for example, did not, right? But as I said in this weekend's video, it can be overcome. It's not always death to that. There was also a VPOC being taken out, but I was very surprised at, the price action, particularly in the coal names. They're all very strong. I like the look, if I'm looking for continuation for tomorrow in this group, I might look at the cheapy one out of this group, which is ARLP, right? This just broke to this, break out of this pattern, right? Next thing up is probably 2116 to watch for, right? And then, of course, if you look at the other names in this one, BTU looks interesting here. If it gets back above the 50-day moving average, first thing it did was get inside the value area. So I would watch the 50-day moving average. And then the other one is what? AR. I'm drawing a blank on this. No, that's Arrow Electronics. It's give me a second. I will find it. There it is, AMR. Right, so AMR, this is our weekend watch list, very small watch list that we came into this week. So you had a nice move up here, and this one, AMR, very close to breaking out as well. And then there's another one too, which I think is probably not the best one of the group. It just didn't show that convincing close on the highs look to it, but that's ARCH. All right, a couple other oil names too, and then we'll talk about a few other things here, but Oxy was very strong today. This was up 3.4%. I would keep an eye on this one. Again, usually we can find some hints. It's right at the point of control. You've got support down here at 62.82. All right. SLB is another one, Schlumberger. Right. This actually just made it out to above this range, above value. And if you like this name, you could set your stop to right around 42.70 and possibly look for new highs in there. All right. The lithium names have been a pocket of strength. ALB just announced that they're going to beat expectations, or they're going to they're putting out better guidance. So ALB, remember, just reported earnings like a couple weeks ago. So this VPOC will be gone, 248, because they're trading a little bit above that. But you could kind of set your sights on a couple of these other things. There's another one behind that at 272. It's got to make it through 259 and 265 first. So might get a little bit of overhead selling. LTHM is another one in this group that's moving up. 3040 would be a level to watch for this one. And then the other one that reported just last week, which had a really nice day, was up 6%, which is SQM, right? So very, very strong out of that group. In terms of my trades for the day, all right, so I was able to take a target. This was a trade that we went over last week in Newmont. I can tell you it's been kind of difficult, I think, in terms of trade ideas and just getting the timing right. You know, I had some good timing in the beginning of last week, but I'll tell you, I was actually in ALB last week. And, you know, some of these names are just very whippy. You have to be cognizant of what the stop price is. You know, perhaps trading a little bit of a smaller position, you know, in hindsight, this is me trading, right? Perhaps putting on a little bit of a smaller position and then having a wider stop might buffer the volatility that we're seeing in the market, because I've been getting stopped out in names where I go in and, you know, a couple of days later, you know, this happened to me with Newmont, and I was able to take a couple targets in the beginning of last week. I went back into this and this worked quite well. Right. So I still think that there might be some more upside ahead of it. Where do I think this thing is going? About 128.60 will probably where I decide to either take the whole position off or the majority of the position. But I like that these names are not expensive. I also like Cliffs Resources here. Why? Because it's doing something a little bit different. It's getting out of this range. It's above value. 2250 would be the stop that I would use on Cliffs Resources. I would also watch to see if this thing can get above I did not take a position in this one, but I was watching 200-day moving average as well as the 20-day moving average. Zscaler was one of those situations. Listen, I like to talk about the losers because the losers are where you kind of learn a little bit to make adjustments, right? Nobody has all winners right now in this market, but I do think like the risk to reward for a Zscaler is not bad here, even though this is a little bit more on the expensive side, right? You know, and perhaps, you know, maybe staying with the strength might be best, which is Palo Alto. Palo Alto was up 4.5% today. One of the things that I talked about in the weekend video was if this thing can stay above 481, right? So 481 and the Sorry, this is the 50 period moving average on the weekly, but I want to see this. By the way, nice looking hammer bar. I want to see this stay above 481, right? Then we can kind of move over to this. We do have to realize that we're going to have some overhead stuff here, particularly the 200-day moving average, but you could use a stop at this point of call it 492. Maybe if you want a little bit more tolerance, 490, right? And then you can kind of go from there for this one. But I like kind of an abstract inverted head and shoulders going on here. All right, a couple other trades. This, I'm also taking some things for, if I see Bitcoin going down, MSTR is my trade in the space. This worked quite well, and I'm out of that one. All right, guys, Apple's another one too that I'm watching. Was just for a day trade. Perhaps this thing could get up to 145.60. That's something that maybe I'll revisit tomorrow if I'm looking for a trade in that space. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. Have a great night. One last thing, I would say, if I had a question about these videos and so on and so forth in the Tribeca Trade Group service, you could go right to my Twitter handle, right? So go to my profile, click here, right, and that's the link to find out if you want to be a member of Tribeca Trade Group. And I could tell you, try it for a month, right, to see what you get in terms of midday videos, our pre-market session that we start every day where we kind of go over some of these things. I was specifically talking about JP Morgan, and I thought the risk to reward was pretty good in JP Morgan. So if you like the end of day commentary, you're going to get a lot more. Of course, you could see all my trades. You could see how I'm kind of dealing with this market on a day-to-day basis. But here's a weekly chart of JP Morgan. I just thought, we didn't see any bounce yet, but I just thought this thing coming into the 200 period moving average, a trend line that we've seen previously, I thought would be a logical place after a pretty steep decline to see a bounce in JP Morgan. All right, guys, have a great night. See you tomorrow.